don't speak up in meetings, who don't perhaps they probably don't present well, they don't communicate as much as other people that might not be neurodiverse, or just people who've learned how to cope with it. So there are stigmas that assumptions made about their capabilities at work, whether it's you assuming that somebody is not listening in a team meeting just because they're not making eye contact with you. That is a big shift that we're trying to push, because there's an assumption that you're not paying attention or you're just not understanding what somebody's saying. But that can be a big trigger for some people with some disorders to make direct eye contact. And also, this kind of is one of those things that can be an intersectional thing with cultural issues too, because in certain cultures, making direct eye contact is not seen as a positive. So there are some things that we just have to learn to adopt a more accepting and less judgmental atmosphere. So that's what we're trying to push with all our initiatives, to kind of bring awareness to different ways of people existing in different ways and interacting in different ways.
In our conversation a couple of days ago, without identifying who this person is, but you talked about an individual that we work with who needed some additional support in terms of how and when to engage. Can you tell a little bit about that? Because I thought it was so interesting, just how you all created that environment of respect for this particular colleague.
So I was just telling Candace a few days ago, we had a team meeting, and that's one of the places that came into play. We were just going around the room and kind of talking about our communication style and what has been effective within the team and what they like to do. And when there was an individual's turn, they asked if we could allow them some time to gather their thoughts and send an email out to the whole team instead of sharing out in a meeting. And everybody in the team was very supportive and open to it. And there was no judgments associated with it. We just acknowledged that that's probably a more effective way for them to communicate with us. And that was just even though we were talking about it, that was just it going into play right there in front of us, that somebody prefers to just send an email out and allow some time to think versus being called upon in a meeting. So that's just one example of how, as supervisors or even with each other as peers, we can be a little bit more expansive in our thinking, where we allow different ways of communication, and people sharing doesn't necessarily mean that they don't know the information. They just want to present it in a different way.
I think that's really a great point, because some of what you're talking about are things that we probably should just do anyway. I mean, there are times in which there are so many things that we're thinking about. We just need that time to process so that what we're sharing is intentional, is meaningful, thoughtful information, instead of just immediate reaction or response. So I appreciate you bringing that to us as an example. On this slide are just some ways in which we can kind of think about some suggestions and recommendations. Can you kind of talk about some of these? I know you've talked about a few of them, but can you just kind of walk us through what this looks like in terms of suggestions, strategies, recommendations?
So the eye contact thing is sorry.
No, you're fine.
The eye contact is a big thing, because culturally in the United States, it's considered not acceptable to not look at somebody when they're talking to you. So to understand that might not be somebody being rude to you or not listening, it is kind of a shift, and it'll take some time to get everybody on board with it. So that's one of the things that we have, because we've interviewed some people who weren't making direct eye contact, and I've had to tell some people that it's okay. It doesn't mean, they're still answering the question. And then also the interview process. This is something that we're actually working with our HR team with. My sister actually had somewhat of a poor experience with an interview where she is neurodiverse, and she was asked, kind of put on a timer to answer a question. Like, you have 60 seconds to answer. She asked for the questions in writing. She didn't receive them. She was just told, just ask us multiple times. So those are just things that naturally might occur in an interview. And it's just things to be aware that it could be setting somebody up for failure, because people that have processing delays, they probably won't do well on a multi-part question. So just having the same questions, but maybe separately, is something to consider. And then one of the best interviews I had, they gave me the questions about 20 minutes before they were interviewing me and just said, you can review them. So I was kind of less stressed out and anxious. So that would be some of the suggestions that institutions can adopt when it makes sense to kind of implement them to create an environment for each other that might be a little bit less stressful.
Can you talk a little bit about how universal design plays into some of the suggestions, recommendations, and things we should consider?
So universal design historically, and just as it's generally known, is almost always kind of in a physical sense, where we think about making sure that
Right.
making sure that we have ramps available, making sure elevators are available, and it's kind of designed in a way where somebody doesn't have to go out of their way to receive the services and the reach the places that they need to go at a college, especially. But it goes a little bit beyond that. It goes extends into also just how we present information. The best practices are to make sure that we have things that are if especially in this classroom setting, if a teacher is presenting information that students are trying to learn, to make sure you have it in writing, to make sure you have an audio for it, and also to kind of keep things simple because students who and people who have some of these neurodiverse brains, they don't always process information the way you might, and it isn't always easy to follow. So directions, like even in if you're working with somebody and telling them that you want them to do something, to do things in a very concise way and step by step and clear, to not use language that might be. One example is humor, a lot of sarcasm. Sarcasm and humor, makes things a little interesting, but people who are neurodiverse and also from different cultures might sometimes struggle to keep up with those because they can't follow directions if there's all this language in the middle. So just to be clear with steps and to make sure that people are following them, the simpler you keep it, the easier it is to follow.
So one of the things that I do want to just also bring into the conversation is something that you talked about a lot, which is the idea of universal inclusion. How does that fit into the ways in which we or practices that we need to think about?
So I really think that a lot of the initiatives that we adopt to cater to neurodiversity and also universal design in a physical sense or just beyond that, it has intersectionalities with other other groups that are minoritized. So if we're going to do inclusivity initiatives around campus, a lot of those things can benefit a broad spectrum of people, whether it's people from different cultures, whether it's English language learners, um, just even for people who are not neurodiverse to have concise, clear directions. And even if my preferred method to learn is auditory and not in writing, that I could just have multiple modes to understand whether I'm neurodiverse or not. So I think it's just a part of allowing people the flexibility to learn and just feel a sense of belonging in whatever method is easiest for them to adopt. So it feeds into inclusion because it impacts a larger scale of people, not just people who are neurodiverse or have a disability. It can be helpful to a broad spectrum of people.
So, in addition to some suggestions and recommendations from an institutional level, you've also provided some suggestions or recommendations for us to think about and consider for our teams and our colleagues. Can you kind of walk us through some of these suggestions and maybe talk a little bit about why they're important?
So I think as an institution, those things might are a little bit harder to address because you're trying to make a broader impact. So even with the trainings we've done with HR, we were told repeatedly that we still give supervisors and directors and managers the autonomy to run their teams the way they do. So adopting things within your teams with each other, and if you're a supervisor within the team that reports to you, is a little bit easier, and you can do smaller things kind of listed there, um, to whatever they may not be reasonable for certain jobs, but in whatever aspect you can do them, makes things a little bit easier within your team. So whenever I have a meeting with anybody on my team, I always like to kind of send an email and give them a heads up about the topic and what we're going to meet about. I know I get triggered a little bit negatively if I get an email from my supervisor that just says, "Do you want to meet? Can I please meet you for 30 minutes?" So I am aware of that. So I try to give my team a heads up when there's something that I want to discuss so that they know that it's nothing bad. It's just a conversation that I'm trying to have. So that's kind of the general practice to adopt with anyone that you're trying to meet with. Um, there's also sometimes this association that people, it may not even be, it might just be an internal association just because of culture, that we think people that take time off or take sick days or vacation time, they're not working as hard. So to kind of step away from that, because there are people that will come to work sick because they think that makes them appear to be like harder workers or better at their jobs, but it's not necessarily the case. So as a supervisor and just as a coworker, I try to make sure everybody knows if you're unwell, please take your time. It is totally fine to get rest and then come back better. So trying to stepping away from those expectations that if you're not here, that means you don't really like your job or you're not really working as hard as other people who come in when they're sick. And then allowing people, like especially that individual that was on my team, the time every day to put a do not disturb on their calendars, to give them some time to kind of go through their email and walk into the day better prepared. Some people may not need it, but as a supervisor, I make sure everybody on my team knows that they have the autonomy to do that with their calendars, allowing them to ownership over their own schedules. So if they work better in an interactive sense in the morning, then to schedule kind of interactive meetings in the morning and then do the other back end work in the evening or vice versa. So however they want to do it, as long as it makes sense for your office, to kind of adopt those, a little bit flexibility and allowing a little autonomy goes a long way.
I really like this idea, like the do not disturb. I think I call it some, I don't know, I have something like focus time or something, which is on my calendar, but maybe I need to change it to do not disturb because sometimes focus time, I'm not sure that everybody understands that focus times means that is my time to focus, not, oh, that doesn't matter. Go ahead and schedule some stuff on top of the focus time. So maybe I should use the do not disturb. You shared another example about the do not disturb, and then just how that creates a layer of respect, I think, for people who might be having some sort of experience, even within work, and then how that actually kind of shows. It speaks to inclusion for sure, but it also just speaks to the care and compassion that we have for each other, as folks are experiencing all sorts of life circumstances. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I feel like there are ebbs and flows with the needs also, kind of like you said, depending on what's happening on the outside. So I think this kind of goes into what you said earlier, how this can be part of creating just an inclusive environment for everyone. So you may not need some of these things on your team because you're neurodiverse, but I think it just creates an environment within a team where people feel a sense of belonging. They feel like they have a say in how things function and they have some control over their own duties and jobs. So I think it is just best practices for everybody to adopt within all interactions with people, not just to cater to neurodiversity.
So, in addition to some of those suggestions, I think were there some additional ideas or suggestions that you wanted to share with the folks before we kind of opened it up to some other questions?
I think I had more, I feel more strongly that this needs to be changed at an institutional level because all these initiatives have been geared kind of towards students. So even the bill that was adopted, it kind of focused on colleges need to adopt a neurodiversity statement to support the student population. So a lot of the focus of these initiatives across the board has been on students, which is our job. So it makes sense, but it's also, these are the people that will one day be in the workforce. So we're serving them, and the unemployment rates are, I think I looked this up, about 30 to 40% of neurodiverse people are unemployed because of these stigmas that are attached to it. So it is our goal to not just serve students, but also prepare them to be accepted and also do things to kind of fit into the world that is not always accepting of neurodiverse brains. So I feel like at an institutional level, it has to be addressed even for their practices with interviews and just a lot, kind of what I think I had it on the other slide, but this one's fine. Just allowing people the gym memberships, like we have access to a fitness center because that's sometimes just a stress relief for people. Allowing people to take a break when they need to. Mostly it's even though they don't want to dictate what directors and managers do to kind of have some general guidelines that they need to stick within. So making sure that there are no interviews within an institution that put a timer on someone. So you can say maybe that, you have a 1 hour interview, but to not have a timed question where it's like you have 30 seconds to answer a question, because that completely, for my sister, it was completely, it ruined her whole interview, and I'm sure it has occurred with other people too. To be a little more sensitive to that, and then also making sure that meetings are shorter. They go for 25 to 50 minutes, whatever kind of meeting it is. But to set these guidelines at an institutional level, so even though directors have the autonomy to run their offices the way they want, they can kind of stay within those guidelines. I think that is what the push needs to be, because the focus has been so hard on students and the student experience that it's not so much adopting it in our everyday life as we interact with people.
I think one of the things that you had shared with me earlier, or maybe you talked about it also at the beginning of the presentation, that, and I think I have the statistic right. One in five individuals that are currently in the workforce are neurodiverse? Is that the right?
Yeah, so it's about 20%. So about 1 in 5 are neurodiverse, and and honestly, they're the same individuals that are gonna they. We didn't really, as an office, we don't really calculate, and we don't have access to employee records, but we know that our students, about 1/3 of them have chronic health issues, and 1/3 of them have learning disabilities, and they potentially have some of these disorders that would be covered under neurodiverse. And they are people that will graduate and then go into the workforce and possibly even work at MCC or other colleges. So we need to be aware that this is the population that we're working with, and to not support them fully as a student. And then when they become employees or coworkers, then we don't have any practices in place to help or support them.
So I see that there are a few questions in the chat. I'm going to try to move over there and see if we can get some of the questions answered. So there was a question regarding different types. I don't know if that means different types of disorders. So I'm not. Maybe you can clarify that for us a little bit, just so that we make sure that we have that question.
Speech. I see. Okay, so speech disorders don't really fall under neurodiverse, only because dyslexia does. And then, but I would say, like, just if somebody has a speech impediment, that doesn't always fall under neurodiverse brains. It's more how you process information. So how you receive, how you process it, and how you present it is kind of, if it's impacted, then it would be a neurodiverse disorder. But in our office, all of these, adopting these practices just like I said earlier, they will be beneficial to a broader spectrum just of people that might not even be falling under some of these disorders. It can still be helpful for somebody who might have a speech disorder, to slow down, to have clear and concise, and allowing them to present information in whatever way they're most comfortable with. So I think it is a positive impact for all people, but I don't believe speech disorders would specifically fall under neurodiverse.
And then there's a question about HIPAA and FERPA. What do we need to consider there to help navigate how to support and make adjustments for our colleagues?
So it is very true. We're protected. We're with HERPA, we can't share any information. So the only time you can share information about a student is if it serves an academic purpose. So typically, talking about somebody's disorders is not under that, but we can talk about some accommodations that people can adopt in place. And then universal design would push for some of these practices to be in place from the get-go without the need for a student or somebody on your team to be impacted by these neurodiverse disorders. So I think that just adopting these practices as a general practice would eliminate the need to share information specifically about an individual with anyone. As far as, we received a training as supervisors to recognize people's needs within our office. So they might not outright come and tell you, but it is okay to share resources with people. So whether it's a student or whether it's a coworker, it is okay to have a conversation about things that might be beneficial without specifically inquiring about somebody's, you don't necessarily have to say, are you struggling with this? You can just say, you can have presentations and regular trainings about resources that are available to employees at your college. You can have, we currently do workshops where we talk to students about general resources that our college offers them without necessarily knowing if anyone is specifically impacted or needs those. So I think to just make everybody aware of resources and adopting practices that would generally be supportive um, will eliminate the need to necessarily share. I don't know if that answered the question, but
Just using kind of some of those universal design.
yeah. So I think what they're saying is if we're not aware of the people's needs, I think once you get to college, it is up to the student or a person as an adult to share those. So nobody can really speak for you at that point. So if a student or a person is not willing to be open about it, it would benefit everybody if we were just trying to implement universal design in just how we function every day and how we interact with people, and then that'll probably eliminate that. But there's also ways to kind of pick up on students and people's needs. So if you're a supervisor, we received a training recently where we were told that you might not blatantly need to be told that somebody needs FMLA or somebody needs an accommodation, but it would be okay to recognize somebody's needs and just pull them into a meeting and just say like, hey, I don't know if there's anything going on. If there isn't, fine. But if there is, there are some resources available to you, and kind of leave it discreetly with them so then they can choose to contact HR and do whatever they need to do to get some accommodations in place. So it is kind of, we have to also respect that privacy. So that is kind of an important part of it.
It's a delicate balance because you want to be certainly as supportive as you can, but also you don't want to overstep. So, yeah. Yes, so yes to will the slides be shared? There's actually going to be a much more detailed version that we'll share with everyone at the end of the presentation. Let me make sure that I got all of the questions that are in the chat. Does anyone have a question that you haven't had an opportunity to add to the chat, but you definitely want to ask that question now?
Just a reminder also that our free PD sessions are taped and put on our ICCDC YouTube channel. So when Candace sends out the slide, she'll also send the link to the YouTube channel, and that of course is free for all colleagues at your college as well, for those who you think would be interested in seeing this.
I kind of have a question/statement. I have all of the things. I'm all the umbrella. And I'm a student, and I am a worker too. And one of the biggest issues I have right now is one of my professors in Canvas, their syllabus is not printable. They made it as a page on Canvas. So it's not accessible for me at home. So I can't, unless I want to do that, and I can't mark on it. So that's, little things like that. And I believe it's even part of our setup that we're supposed to have it a certain way. So there's that. As an employee, something that I struggle with is if given a long list of things that I need to do, I actually need a printed list because I have ADHD and autisms, and I will remember the first thing you said and the last thing you said, and everything in the center is gone. And so being able to be that person that's like, hey, I'm old school and I need to write this down. People make fun of you now when you write stuff down. So that, I love how you said letting people know if they're going to be speaking about something in a meeting, because when your brain is 200 million things, trying to find one answer is really hard. So like being more specific about a question if somebody doesn't seem to be getting it. But there's also something that when you have autism and ADHD together, your body actually wars against each other. And so because ADHD wants spontaneity and freedom to do the things, but autism needs regulation and rules and all the things. And it's very difficult to keep them all together, and your brain is scattered no matter what. Having somebody who just understands that about you is amazing. So I love what you're doing, and I think it's amazing. Just
Thank you
saying.
for sharing, Sarah.
For sharing.
That resonates with me a little bit with what happened with my sister. In the interview that I said she bombed, she asked them to provide a written questions because she said it would be a lot easier. And they had multi-part questions too. So she didn't share her disorder, but she said I would do much better if I could just see these in writing. And it was kind of dismissed. And she was just told, well, you could just ask us multiple times. And she struggled through that whole interview. So I appreciate what you just shared because I think it's kind of a universal issue with a lot of people who are neurodiverse to just keep things simple and allow them the flexibility to do things the way that works best for them.
And be able to ask a question in 3 different ways as a supervisor. Because you could ask it for person 1 and they'll have no problem. Person 2 might not have a problem, but I'm going to have a problem. So you need to be able to ask the question in a different way because I know the answer. I just don't understand how you're asking me right now. So taking the time, your employees aren't mad. They're not upset. They might feel really dumb because all of a sudden they don't understand, but they know the answer. So having a supervisor too with that training, that's like, hey, let's turn it around and let's ask in a different way. Very important.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Sharon.
Where we get a lower, we're in my, at least for myself, I've spoken, and this is just anecdotal. Some other faculty are not getting much response from the evaluations. So I have a question for you, not to change any processes, but maybe a suggestion. Is there a way in the system, in Blackboard, where the link can be a more prominent? And what I'm getting at is, my son was in just graduated a few weeks ago in a master's program at DePaul, and they use D2L. And what would happen is every time when the evaluation would launch, every time he would log into D2L, the link to fill out like a reminder.
I'm not sure who was speaking, but your audio went out. Maybe you can add that question to the chat and then we can try and get your response from there. Are there other questions? Any comments? Well, I'm not seeing any additional comments or questions in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Richards. This was extremely helpful. As I said, the PowerPoint and also the PowerPoint will be available. The slide deck will be available, a much more detailed version of it. And then also some links to some resources will be in that slide deck as well. And then the recording will be available to you on the ICCDC YouTube channel.
And then,
yes.
Really quick, will Naina's contact information be available too if we have some specific questions for her?
Yes.
Great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Purva.
Thank you. I had announced at the beginning before this session started that after this session, I will be emailing all of the members. First and foremost, let me rewind. Naina, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. It was so good, I skipped over it. So thank you for that time and commitment. I know our members, both present here today and those in the future that will be watching it, really thank you so much. That was really timely and useful for our students and our employees.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then Candace, I think you're done with the recording. So you can turn that off. So we record our sessions, as you know, so it can be presented on our YouTube channel.